You did it. You really did it. You found your way to the latest episode of the Stormchaser Improv podcast show. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Travis Lincoln Cox. I'm joined by Mr. Andrew Pish.
Hello, listeners.
And of course, Anatasha Blakely is here.
Hello, listeners.
We are interviewing the amazing Greg Hess today. What a joy to have this guy on the podcast. We've been fans of his from the very beginning.
You might know him from the improv team Cook County Social Club. You might also know him from his work with the Improvised Shakespeare Company, where they improvise news stories by William Shakespeare himself.
He's also the co-host of the smash hit podcast Mega, a satirical improvised podcast about a fictional megachurch. It's so funny. Check that out on all your podcasting apps. Also follow their page on Instagram, Mega the Podcast.
And you can also follow Greg at Hey Greg Hess.
This interview was everything we hoped and dreamed it would be. We talked about how Cook County has developed a skill of recognizing pattern within the show and using that to help them almost like create a new form every night.
We also talked about how it's good to intellectualize your art and think about process, but how you can't take that too far and how at a certain point you just have to show up on stage and have fun.
Yeah. And we did. At one point, we found ourselves kind of walking down a side street about artificial intelligence and the impact that it's going to have on art and really all of our lives. And it's going to get weird.
This script was actually written by ChatGPT.
Maybe you'll never know for sure. This entire podcast is artificial intelligence.
I am a digital avatar. You can't prove that I've ever existed in real life. And Anatasha watches AI porn.
There's no judgment, though. That's fine. If you, listener, are into AI porn, that's great. We think that's great.
I have the proof. If you Venmo me $15, I will send you the proof.
So without...
So on that note...
Please enjoy our artist brain interview with Sir Gregory Hess.
You're listening to the Stormchaser Improv Podcast Show.
What's up, players?
Yo.
Yeah, what up?
Let me see if I can make my brain work at 10:30 in the morning. When I said 10:30, I was like, yeah, that'll be fine. And right now I feel like I don't even know what improv is. So we'll see. Pish, are you learning to play the banjo?
Don't ask about the banjo.
Oh my gosh, what a great...
Pish.
What a
This
great
is
way
a
to
great
start.
segue. Why don't you play that song that you wrote for him, buddy?
Would you please?
My dad, when I was like 12, I found this guitar in my closet that was my older brother's. And so its strings were broken. And so we went to a guitar shop to get it restrung. While we were checking out, my dad turned to me out of nowhere. He had never said anything like this before. And he goes, if you ever want to learn how to play the banjo, let me know.
You're like,
and then he didn't say anything about it for years until I was in college. I was like 22, 23. And he goes, hey, Andrew, I was on eBay. And I found a couple deals on a couple of banjos, and I put down a couple of bids. And then he called me back like an hour later, and he goes, so I won 2 banjos.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so he didn't know that he was like purchasing them. He thought he was bidding on them. And
What kind of banjo is that? Can you tell me the brand?
it is, I can't even fucking tell you. It's a Fender.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, I know.
It's a Fender 5-string.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he got these and he was like, you can learn it and I can learn it. And he did not have the patience to learn a musical instrument for the first time in his life. And so a couple years ago, he gave me his banjo as well. So now I have 2 banjos that like at some point I will learn to play. But
you have dueling banjos.
I don't have the time right now.
That's cool. That's a nice banjo, actually. And it
is. It's a
you know,
really
I
nice
play
banjo. You do play banjo.
I was going to say, you seem like you know a lot about the banjos.
I have a working ability on the banjo. I like took lessons and stuff. Like in high school, I was a little bluegrass redneck kid. So I played in a bluegrass band. And Not banjo in the bluegrass band, but I really desperately wanted to learn banjo, and I can play some 5-string banjo.
Can you
I
really?
can play like the basic shit, and then
Yeah.
My
It's-
banjo's sitting in a storage unit right now, so it tells you how much I play it.
Well, I have mine hung up on my wall with like the aspiration to play it, and I haven't touched it since I
It looks
hung it
cool.
up.
Does that mean, Pish, does that mean that you have that there because you want to look
Check.
like you want to look the part?
I didn't hang that there because of the podcast. We record like once a month. I hung it there for.
Okay,
Jesus Christ,
got
can
you,
we talk
got
about
you.
something else? Let's talk about AI.
Thanks for coming on the show, Greg. We're just gonna pick apart everything that Pish has on his screen
Let's
right
just
now.
like go through his room.
Yeah. Yeah, let's just. I mean, we basically already started, but now we're starting. We're starting officially. I want to segue off all this banjo talk to pick your brain more about like, because obviously you're an improviser. That's why you're here. But like, what
You
else?
want to pick my brain,
I
Travis?
want to pick your brain, Gregory.
Banjo
You
style.
said not to get.
Does anyone
sexual.
call you Gregory?
My mom, my mom calls me Gregory. I think I had I had an idea in my head at one point when I moved to LA. I was like, maybe I'll change it officially to Gregory Hess because it sounds it's like, you know, it's rhythmically the same as Gregory Peck. And he did well in Hollywood.
I want to call you Sir Gregory Hess.
Sir Gregory Hess. That I'll respond to that. And then I was like, there was another Greg Hess, I think, in IMDb, and I was then you know when you join the union, you have to give all the options for your name. So I think I put Greg Hess was my first choice. I think I put GT. My middle name is Todd, and so I put GT Hess as my second one, and then as a bit, I did G Toddy Haas as my third one. And because I put G Toddy Haas, a lot of people in my family call me G Toddy now, including my nieces who all call me G Toddy.
G Toddy.
Yeah.
That's good. That's really
G Toddy
good.
Haas.
Such a good name and very cute from a niece.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, and they're just like, hey, G Toddy, and I'm like, this is so funny that a bit for my SAG card became a nickname that I guess I gave to myself.
Is your family playful? Like, did you grow up in a playful home?
Yes, I would say that they were playful. My mom is life of the party. I think my mom's 68. She's the one that's like, let's stay up and play a game, and it'll be like 1:30, and everybody's like, well, let's go to bed. Very extroverted. My dad is where I get my like weird sense of humor from. He's not super extroverted, but if high weirdness was to go down, it would always be instigated by my dad. And I think he's the reason that my dad's a little bit of a, what's the word for it? He's just mischievous. And I think when it comes to maybe my instincts on stage, I think it probably comes from that. My need to perform is probably from my mom, and then my ability to just want to fuck around is probably from my dad.
That's great that you use that word because that is the number one word I use to describe you in my mind and to other people about your
interesting.
sense of play is that I'm like, oh, Greg is so mischievous. And if I'm being mischievous, I kind of feel like I got Greg Hess vibes.
I do like making mischief on stage. It's a great way to approach an improv scene. I think I'm someone who a long time ago just really wanted scenes to be funny and fun and not take themselves too seriously, which I think there were a bunch of years in improv where I think everyone thought that you had to do long 2-person relationship scenes that sort of ended in a hug or a divorce. And that's fine, but I never really went to a comedy theater to want to go see that. And so I think my sense of poking at the scene, trying to cause mischief or reactions was always from my want to try to get a reaction out of my scene partner and the audience. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How do you do that from like an organic place that doesn't feel like
Forced trap?
Like
Oh, I
hacky?
don't.
You're
It's-
forced. Yeah,
Yeah,
forced.
it's totally
Yeah.
hacky.
No, it's not though, because I've seen people who are like trying to be funny on stage and it doesn't work. But but then I watch Cook County and you guys mess with each other constantly and it does work. So I'm not sure what the difference is.
Well, the difference to me is just commitment to the character and to the reality that you're creating. So I think a lot of people mistake trying to mess with each other or get reactions or be mischievous or whatever we want to call it on stage as still breaking the reality of the character. But I think with Cook County, we try to do two things. One is, I mean, even last week we had a show And we just always say something like, don't forget to emotionally react. That's about the extent of our reminders to ourselves. Our worst shows are when things happen and we don't react to them and use them to the full extent of what they could give us. I mean, an example would be, I think we were 3 guys playing pinochle, playing cards. I think at one point I said something like, "Hey, can I be honest with you guys?" I was going to like throw something in. It was about alien abduction, and I think I was going to say something about how at one point I think I may have been abducted by aliens. But before I even could get there, both Brendan and Mark were like, "No, oh God, no!" Just like he's gonna start getting emotional with us, and even just that created a game of like, yeah, 3 guys playing pinochle. It's funny that 2 guys don't want to hear the other guy's feelings. And it really had nothing to do with the content of what I was about to say. It had everything to do with 3 guys trying to be guys hanging out playing cards, but one guy starts to get emotional and it makes them super uncomfortable. So that's a good example of they're definitely messing with me because I'm essentially trying to offer a gift that I can't even get to. But inside of that is a really fun idea of, yeah, guys aren't able to talk about their feelings and they'll do anything they can to not. And in that, we found a fun game, which was I kept trying to bring up this serious thing that had happened to me, and they just wouldn't allow it to happen.
I feel like this makes a lot of sense because I often feel like Cook County and great improv, there's like 2 things going on. There's the show, and then there's what's happening with the improvisers. And like the balance between those 2 things is really where like I get off, and I'm like, ooh, I love that. But what you said about commitment to character is where I think younger teams go a little askew, is because instead of being committed to character, they're worried about what's going on with the improvisers at the expense of committing to the character. But you guys have such a high commitment to the reality of the show that it becomes really balanced and pleasing.
Yeah, I think that for a long time I was worried about doing things correctly. Then I was worried about trying to be cool, of trying to create something new that wasn't being done. And then now I think I'm in a place, especially with those guys, where we just find each other really funny and we trust each other implicitly, I think, on stage. And all that stuff kind of falls away because then you just get to try to find the heat of whatever you're doing rather than, I don't really worry about their feelings ever, them as people. I'm fully like just committing to the reality of the characters that we're playing at our best, I hope. Yeah, usually off stage, it's pretty rare when one of us is frustrated with something another person did on stage. Pretty rare.
Was it always like that, or is that something that's...
No.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, we had eras where like, I think I had a few years where I was like, we're too this or we're too that, or, I wanted to like really mess with, I think early on we made a stupid rule that was no tag outs. And then we would get like in big fights with each other. Like, it was all transformation, no tag outs. Every scene bled into the next scene. We would just switch scenes on the fly. Yeah, we would have long, probably too serious discussions about whether tag outs should be, and Mark would be like, I think we should tag if we want to. And it was just like, no, we're not doing that, man. And it was, and so...
Greg Hess has like a cigar in his mouth.
Yeah,
like, no,
truly.
That's not who we are.
I remember Kevin Dorff actually told me a really funny story. If y'all know who Kevin Dorff is, and for the audience, he's like a legendary improviser, wrote some of the best stuff at Second City, and then went on to write for Conan for years. But he told me, I think he was on Blue Velveeta, and there was another team called Jazz Freddy that were early IO teams in Chicago, and they actually got in a fist fight outside of IO about openings. And that to me was simultaneously the funniest and the greatest thing of just like, I love how serious people take it at different points, that a bunch of improv people would actually come to blows over whether they were going to do an organic opening or not.
There were multiple times when I had to walk away from Anatasha when we first started. Multiple times.
Definitely.
Yeah.
We all did the thing where we were like, we're going to talk after every show. We're going to talk about what went well and what we could maybe do differently.
Yeah.
And then we would spend like 10 seconds on what went well. And then we would get to what we can do differently.
We eventually had to make a rule that was like, we can't talk about the show.
We don't talk after shows.
We don't talk.
Yeah.
If we hang out after the show, we don't talk about the show. we can
Other
talk
than to be like, hey, good job, that was fun.
Yeah,
That's it.
exactly.
Yeah, I think it can be easy to be hypercritical, especially early on. And then it's to the detriment of what I think is maybe the most important thing in an improv group is just ensemble. I was on a lot of improv teams where there were a bunch of just killer people and it just didn't work by dint of, who knows, maybe people going for their own jokes, like maybe it was just the wrong styles clashing. To me, it was always, the alchemical chemistry of whatever we figured out in Cook County was the thing. That's something you can't really coach. It's not something you can note. You just know when it's on and you're going, oh my God, that was so fun. How do we do that again?
This kind of leads me to something I was thinking about, which is like y'all have been performing for a while now.
Yeah, some would say too long.
How long has it been for people who don't know?
2005 was our first. Let's see. 2005 we started rehearsing, and I think we rehearsed for 6 months, and maybe our first show was 2006. We had this also very self-aware, pretentious rule that we were going to rehearse for 6 months before we did a show and not show it. And I think we rehearsed twice a week and didn't show any. It was as if we were the Manhattan Project or whatever. We were like, and then we will show people what we've been working on.
I mean, we also were like, we have to rehearse before we do a show. But, it's interesting because, like, there's something very silly about taking anything in life so seriously, let alone improv. But at the same time, it does build, like, this sacred care between you. And maybe that's part of the alchemy, is just that everyone's like, we're in agreement that we really care about this.
Yeah. We had such a competitive streak in us too early on, where I think we really wanted to prove ourselves, and I think that was something I think in the air when we were not to the expense of other people, but I think we really wanted to show that we deserved a show and a slot at IO. I think we knew that we were on to something, and then we wanted to come out of the gate swinging, and it was great because I think by doing that, by having that need to prove ourselves early on, it kind of got us into the mode of leaving it all on stage every night. And, we ended up running at IO for 7 years. I remember people kind of being jealous or mad that we got a show because we had just kind of finished classes. We were still pretty young at the theater. But I just remember we had that little chip on our shoulders of we can do this. We really want to make our show great. That kind of drove us, I think, in the early years of just the sense that we needed to prove ourselves.
How often were y'all performing during those 7 years?
Once a week.
Once a week?
I mean, at least. Yeah. Sometimes other places. But yeah, we sort of locked down Tuesday nights for 6 years. Yeah. So it was a long run.
Wow. So over that time, and especially over the time since when y'all haven't been in Chicago, how have y'all still been performing at a high level? Like, how do you keep things fresh? Like, because I'm getting to the age now where, like, just life shit happens, and like stuff wears you down. I see a lot of people just stop improvising altogether. And to see the joy that y'all still perform with is really, I think, inspiring for me.
Yeah, it's not linear, and I don't think it's easy all the time. I think before the pandemic, I would say that was probably our closest to us thinking, oh, maybe we hang it up or just not have a regular slot. Yeah, people's life stuff happens. People have kids. People don't want to drive. I mean, I'm talking about Brendan, but just like, it's 11 o'clock or whatever, and trying to get him to come from South Pasadena. It's an actual ask, on a school night or whatever. I don't know how I wouldn't necessarily say we're always focused on keeping it fresh. I do think after the pandemic, our first show back, it felt so fun. And I mean, honestly, the things that I miss most about doing shows, it's like 50%, maybe even 60% green room. I miss doing bits in the green room as much as I miss being on stage, because especially the way we've found that we like to play is whatever we're doing backstage ends up just bleeding right onto stage. And I think that was always a fun, we kind of roll onto stage with the same energy bits. I mean, sometimes like a bit that we would be talking about backstage would like show up in the show. I love that. I always thought that was such a fun blurring of the line between our friendship and what we were doing on stage and the things that we're thinking and talking about. That was the stuff I missed the most. And so I think coming back to it, it was just a reminder of, oh, improv for me is a great exercise in life in terms of my relationships, what I'm thinking about, what I'm talking to those guys about, and then finding ways to express that in an artistic or comedic way, I think is what I think about keeping, when I say keeping it fresh. That doesn't mean that we don't have shows where I'm like, that felt like a bit we've done before, whatever. I try really hard now to push especially this many years in, to be like, oh, if this feels too familiar, how can I throw a wrench into it to make it feel, or not a wrench, or just knock it on its side in a way that makes it feel like something new.
I like that a lot.
I was talking with Travis, I think before our last show, where I was thinking like, because there is something about like the engagement from the audience comes from like the improviser feeling almost a little like out of their depth and like not comfortable. I can totally see how trying to throw a wrench into what you're doing so that you don't get too predictable for yourself and fall into just like this expected kind of thing.
A tightrope walker. Like nobody wants to watch the tightrope walker who's just like so comfortable on like this big board or whatever. Like it's the fact that they might fall at any second that makes that show exciting to watch. I think improv's a lot like that.
I would even add to that, it's the impression that they might fall. I mean, it's the same way with like a magic trick. I do think the tension built of a magician being like, oh wait, you had a jack? Okay, that's strange. I mean, I just saw this insane magician at a party do a trick where he was like, this is a new one. I've never done this in a group, and then of course was like, oh, you got a jack. Okay, this is weird. And you're like, wait, did he actually mess up? And then of course he didn't. It's like twice as good as you thought. I think taking care of the audience in a way that is, I always sort of think in early days, younger improvisers to the art of improv or whatever you want to call it, automatically make the audience nervous when they start to perform. And your whole time you're going, oh God, I hope they don't humiliate themselves. This is really awkward. You can tell they're scared. I think that's always something I try to teach people. You have to proceed as if this is as warm a bath as you've ever been in. And then if it starts to fall off the rails, like you have to delight in it falling off the rails and make sure that the audience is also delighting in it falling off the rails.
It's like the person who can trip and laugh at themselves. So you can laugh at them instead of being like pitying them.
Yeah.
Because you're like, oh, they're fine. Like even if they trip, they're confident, they love themselves, they're okay.
So much of it is just a setting expectation for the audience that you know what you're doing and that it's going to be fine. And then if something happens that it's out of the ordinary of a typical improv show, then I think you're doubly won, because a lot of people have seen improv shows where they leave and go, oh, it's all right. It was good. It was improv. And I always kind of want people to leave the show being like, oh my God, I've never seen anybody do something like that. It's not obviously 100% of the time, but I think I have the blessing of like having a couple of groups I perform with that sort of are always trying to elevate it so that it feels like a highly comedic theatrical experience rather than just like a bunch of people standing on a back line and sort of walking forward and trying to comedically process an idea, which it always never seemed that interesting to me.
You do seem to be in two, like between Cook County and Improvised Shakespeare Company, two groups that are elevating the art form. I know you said earlier, you're like, oh, always trying to do something new and maybe that's not your focus anymore. But I actually do feel like that's two groups that have pushed the art form forward for me.
Yeah.
I wonder if you attract that or if you're attracted to it.
Oh, I'm definitely attracted to it. I think I do think it's a goal. I've been lucky to be a part of this, which is like, this is something that you could buy a ticket to and not feel like you wasted $15, or in the case of Improvised Shakespeare, $35. Oh yeah, like you paid that money. Like we need to deliver something that is like a theatrical show.
I went to a show, Improvised Shakes, a couple months ago, and everyone in my group left being like, when can we go back? Like, we'll take our money. That was amazing. What I mean? Like, you providing value. So I think it's amazing.
Yeah. And I it is a thing because you have to train audiences we're in just an era of trying to train people to pay for what you make. It's a difficult thing because all of us are close enough in age that you basically came from an era where you thought you could just download things for free. You thought, like everything was essentially free for a while. I mean, I'm guilty. I mean, as soon as Napster came out, I was like, yes, finally I can like rip off all the artists that I love. I think it is like a retraining of audience to be like, hey, we're truly the bottom of when it comes to the equity of the money that gets circulated for anything that people make. It's the worst for the people making it, and that's across the board. And I can't think of an industry where it's not. I do think it's important for like improv or sketch or whatever, or stand up. It's like, do a great show so people don't feel like I'm bummed out that I had to pay $10 for this show. Improv has kind of an amateur problem. There's an amateurism to improv that I think like, and I love that people do it as a hobby, but if you are going to sort of try to do it as a thing that people buy a ticket for, I think there has to be another discussion of like, we're not just showing up to like fuck around for 30 minutes and be like, it's improv. Like I always hated that. Like, it was fun. That always bothered me. It just seemed like no one was like pushing to be like, man, did we deliver a kick-ass show?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that's such a hard problem too, because how do you set yourself apart, right? A lot of people do improv as a hobby, but even people who are serious about it, but maybe greener, want the feedback loop from being on stage, and they have to get on stage at some point in order to feel what works at every different level that they're at ever. So they need to do a show, but you are like, I'm putting on a show and I'm going to charge $35 and I'm at that point. And how do you separate yourself, in terms of marketing, but also is there a better way for people to become better without making improv have such a bad reputation while they're doing it? I've been thinking about this and I'm like, I don't know if there's a better way.
I don't know if there is a better way. I mean, I benefited from doing 10 years at every sort of bar, small black box, weird performance space that I could. But, a lot of those shows were bad. Nobody paid for them. Nobody was there thinking they were about to see the greatest thing. And then sometimes the greatest thing did happen, and you felt really lucky that you were sort of the fly on the wall for when it did. I guess my feeling is if you're performing like y'all's show is a really well executed, feels professional example of, hey, we're putting on a show. It looks and feels like the same thing as if I went to a stand-up show or something like that. And it doesn't just feel like, oh, maybe people will show up that we booked. There's like that laissez-faire attitude of improv that I think sort of leached in and always kind of made it a clubhouse feeling, which is super fine, I think, as you're coming up. But then if you want to take your group or your show to the next level, like you have to be as serious about that off stage as you are on stage. I don't think you get as good as you guys get without doing a bunch of bad shows for 5 people. But then eventually, like you do get to the place where it's like, no, we are going to charge a ticket price. We're better than everybody else, and you should be able to pay 10, 15, $20 or whatever.
And it's such a fun like balancing act. We were just talking about how you can't take it too seriously, but then also like if you don't at least take it sort of seriously, then what are we doing here?
Yeah.
So there's a balance of like take it really serious, try really hard, put on a great show, but then also like just have fun. I don't know. It's interesting.
It's the tenuous relationship between art and commerce has always bothered me. I don't even know how to navigate it very well. I think most artists don't. Yeah, taking yourself seriously and your business seriously while also trying to keep it spontaneous, fun, something that you like to show up and do. It's really hard. I mean, there are times when all of the planning and all of that stuff can get so in the way of, hey, I just want to get out on stage and do something, So yeah, it's a difficult balance, it for sure. I think that's at every level. I think that's at every level of any kind of artistic pursuit.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like the best, most beautiful performances in very expensive films. It's like in the moment they have to be like, I have to forget all the pressure of what brought me to this moment and just enjoy what I'm in. It's a difficult juggling act, I'm sure.
Yeah, can I ask a stupid question? I was studying a lot of Buddhist stuff recently, and there was one quote that stuck out to me. It's like, you can't get too intellectual about this because at the end of the day, you have to remember that it's like to reduce your and other people's suffering. like that's what you're really going after. So don't overthink it too much. And I was wondering, what is that for comedy? Like, don't get too intellectual about it. Instead, make sure blank.
I would probably err on the side of I do get too intellectual about it, and then when I do, it gets less fun. I think that was also because I taught for so long, and as much as I liked teaching, I'm not sure if I'll teach again. Maybe big question mark for me, because I spent so much time analyzing how to, break down what people are doing on stage and how to teach it block by block to get someone to a place where they feel comfortable doing it. I think that was good because I do think I know how it works, and I do think I have some tricks and techniques that have helped people to get there, but I think it was at the expense of my own fun. I think when you over intellectualize, if you think about it, comedy is all about surprise. When you stop being surprised, that's when Holly and I laugh. Sometimes we'll be watching something that we know is funny and you're going like, oh, okay, yeah, I see how they did that. And it's hard to get out of that analytical mind because you do the same thing and just get back to the place where like, can I just laugh at something or can I be surprised by something on stage?
I feel like Nick Armstrong said to me recently that he likes watching very dramatic, like horror, like he likes every other genre for that reason, because he's like, oh yeah, comedy's how I spend my life, so I don't even want to watch it. I want to watch this other stuff because that's what's entertaining to me now.
Yeah, I can't watch horror because I'm too scared, but yeah, I'm the same way. I would say I watch a decent amount of comedy just to know what's out there, but if I'm gravitating towards something, I probably wouldn't throw on like the latest half-hour sitcom that's come out just because I don't really want to.
Yeah, you're like, that's what I spent all day thinking about.
Yeah, totally.
At the expense of your fun, though, I do want to make you intellectualize a little bit. If
yeah,
that's
okay.
Totally. We talked about how Cook County's show, at least this is what I remember from talking to you, so please tell me if I'm wrong. Between pattern and finding form birthed from the show, could you just talk about those things a little bit and what they are and what that means for your team?
Yeah, so sort of finding the form on the fly was always something that I think we had been interested in, and it kind of came out of, I'm not sure if the other guys would say this. I remember watching, there was a team called Foursquare at I.O. that was like really amazing. John Lutz, Dan Backadall, Peter Gross, and Rob Janis. I remember they would kind of, I don't think they had a form per se, but they would make cool internal moves in the show that just kind of felt like they had a language essentially between them in terms of the moves of the show. I remember Noah Gregoropoulos, rest in peace, kind of broke it down as there were 3 types of improv shows, like a conceit show, improvised Shakespeare, an improvised musical, etc. Then there are forms, the Herald, the living room, the this, the that. And then there are palette, what he called palette. And palette meaning like the team has an agreed upon like set of moves or language for the show, but we don't have if we were a band, like we know like we've got a sax, a violin, I'm just naming Dave Matthews Instruments, a drummer and or whatever, and a tuba player. And then and we kind of know that those are the things that we make music with or paint with or whatever the analogy should be. And so I think we did glom onto that idea pretty hard because it felt like, oh, we have a certain, as we're in the show, we're deciding almost subconsciously like, oh, this is how the show moves. These are the types of moves that we're making in the show to make the piece come together. An example I use a lot of times when I teach this is we did a show where it was, I think, 2 guys selling a car or something, and we realized like the edit pattern was if they walked around the car, the scene changed. It was always a scene, I think, around a car, but it became different characters. And then just heightening off that little move of like, okay, if you circle the car, the scene changes. Well, what happens if you go back around the car the other way? Oh, it goes back to the previous scene. Oh, okay, now we know that. That kind of became what you would consider like a palette move in the show, like the walk around the car edit or whatever you want to call that. So then to us, that became like, oh, okay, what happens if we climb through the car? Oh, two scenes crash together, or whatever that ended up being. You in your mind are going, well, how do we now heighten the thing that we found? So that's not only a pattern, it's not only a move, but that's also a pattern, right? We're trying to heighten off of a pattern that we discovered early on, which was just this simple little thing of walking around the car and changing the scene. I think Cook County at our best was like really doing that in finding different ways of changing scenes, changing characters, making the show move into new places, breaking the fourth wall, doing meta moves. I mean, last week we did a show where I kept changing characters, and he just basically called out like, I'm only going to be this guy for this entire show. And then it came down to us begging him to play a new character at the end of the show, and he just wouldn't do it. He just couldn't do it. And I think his like face got eaten off by an alien or something ridiculous. But like even that, our commitment to being like, please, man, just play something different. Like it's so important right now because do you see what we're dealing with? Yeah, we're sort of calling out this silliness of like playing multiple characters in a show, but we're emotionally really latched on to this like, please, man, you gotta do this, you gotta play someone new, Mike, or whatever. That's like a fun little move within the show, which is, we'll call it the like meta character move, which is one guy's stuck in a character, and now we're just going to try to force him into situations where we really hope that he could play another character, but he never will. That to me was where we really hit our stride with formlessness, I guess you would call it, or finding the show kind of on the fly. It became a series of moves and a series of exploiting pattern to try to get us into what, like if you left the car show, you'd be like, oh my gosh, the car show. If we were talking about it, we'd be like, oh yeah, the rule was this, and we that's the car form, and then we would try something new next week.
Was that at Cage Match? Because I feel like
it was a Cage Match.
Like yeah. Jacob literally uses that show as an example
of
really? That exact thing. That the same one. He's always like, yeah, the car show, and he explained it to me exactly as you just did, and I'm like, wow. So it's very obvious as an audience member then as well.
Yeah, and it's fun too as an ensemble to find those things, and then it becomes, I feel like the improv tool belt is a oft overused metaphor, but it does become something that you don't need it to do a good improv show, but it adds sort of a layer of, it's sort of an impressive layer, I think, onto your show when you do have those types of game on game going on, or games of the show, or games of the piece, sometimes we would call it. And then just to the first part of your question, like the pattern stuff really, I think, was born out of all of us knowing and loving like really classic comedy setups and pattern, and all of us growing up. I mean, Cook County is like a great example of like all of us loved Naked Gun. Naked Gun is a perfect example, right? Any of those Zucker Brother movies, which is like the stupidest thing taken totally seriously. You can see, like you watch those movies, Brendan and I, Mark, will talk about like Laurel and Hardy or Fatty Arbuckle, or like old reel-to-reels that we would be like, dude, have you seen this pattern that they did? It's so fun because we realized like, oh, we were really good at those physical sort of patterny bits, and then we just were like, oh, we can improvise like that. That's like that's in our wheelhouse. So I think that's kind of where our sense of repetition and pattern came from.
Cool. Thank you. That was excellent.
There's like 3 improv nerds out there that are like, finally
and they're sitting on this
Fatty
Zoom
Arbuckle.
call.
I knew it.
No, we had a couple sessions where you coached us, Stormchaser, way back in the day, and I think you talked about this, like finding the pattern in the show, and it legitimately, like, it changed the way we play for the rest of time after that.
It's really fun too because I think it gives the audience. I mean, it's almost we always used to teach callbacks, and I think callbacks are actually it's a writerly instinct, I think, a lot of times, to be like, oh, how am I going to call this back? You're like on the side thinking like, how am I going to walk on with like so and so? And there was something that I always felt that was a little bit difficult about that to teach. And then I thought pattern was an easier way of thinking of it, because it's like, oh, I find myself back in the doorway from the first scene where I got murdered. Even if no one comes in and murders me, maybe I kill myself. It's that stuff where it's like almost like emotional heat maps to the show, where it's like, oh, this funny thing happened here. And just even going about it, like, how can I heighten that or repeat it again seemed easier to me than like standing on the wing and being like, I'm going to walk on as the doctor again. I hope it works in this scene. I think it's just maybe a different way of like calling stuff back too.
I was very attracted to the idea of pattern and of palette. And and I do feel like that's something that we were working on for a time, but I also feel like there's more to touch there for us in terms, like there's more to learn there. And I'm wondering, I don't know, as a coach, like how do you work on it beyond explaining it?
Yeah, or even how do you see that like for your own process? Where do you learn from nowadays, especially not having a relationship with like an improv theater or teachers, you know?
I'm trying to do. I'm a little bit. To be totally honest, I'm a little bit in a rut with what improv is to me at the moment, and I think I'm trying to get myself back into beginner's mind with some of this stuff. Where I think for me, I'm trying to do things that surprise myself, and even if it's like a character point of view or a physical thing, not maybe being so macro with my like, well, what's the show and all of that, and really kind of going back to basics, which is how can I walk onto stage in ways tonight that truly like try to surprise myself and play points of view that I've not really explored before, because I think it's so easy to get safe when you're rewarded for the types of moves that you make and the characters that you play. Then that can get to the place where you're just like, you default to those things because people laugh. So I think I'm just trying to get back a little bit, even with like Improvised Shakespeare is a good example. I mean, we just finished a run where we were doing 8 shows a week.
Whoa.
It's really a process of being like, okay, how do I make this fun and interesting for myself? I remember there's a for people that are into process interviews. I mean, my great interest is listening to people talk about process. I don't know if that's anybody else, but there's a great interview with Andre 3000 and Rick Rubin on his podcast. Y'all have
I've listened. It's so good. And I also I'm obsessed with the process. That's why sometimes I'm like, I think I get a little in my head because I almost like talking about the thing as much as doing it, which is sometimes a problem.
Yeah, I mean, and it can be, or it could be a great thing. Like you're probably a great teacher for that because you're really like trying to process the process, as they say. Yeah, in the interview with Andre 3000, I remember him saying Outkast was at the top of their game. They were touring the world. It was the whole thing, and he was on stage rapping and thinking about what he was going to order back at the hotel for room service.
Wow.
And it's that thing, and I've been there. I mean, I've totally been there where I'm like, oh man, I can't wait to like be done so that I can go eat a sandwich, or whatever. And that's when I've had long talks with Holly about that, of just being like, oh, does that mean I need to stop for a while? Does that mean I need to find something new about this that I really enjoy? And I think it's because I get bored when I think the show is something that I've been in before, and I think it's disingenuous as an improv experiment. Even with scripted stuff, you have to approach it like it's the first time you've ever said the line, right? And it's the first time you've ever heard the thing, and you have to do that on an improv too, which is like you can't cash out mid-show because you're like, yeah, it's going pretty well, and then this will happen, and we'll probably get a light pole, and then I'll go eat a sandwich, So I'm trying to get to the place again where I'm making choices for myself that feel exciting and risky and kind of scary.
You know what I kind of think has helped me in a similar rut was picking up a new hobby.
Oh,
because
yes.
Even when I came back to improv, I just felt that having beginner's mind in something else like kind of brought me back into my body.
Oh,
even though it was like totally unrelated.
I think that's great.
Yeah, Natasha, you wrote down a question. If there's anything that's inspiring you nowadays, or like anything you're reading or interested in that's, in Natasha's words, making your heart beat.
It is a very Natasha phrase. What is making my heart beat? I think curiosity I'm trying to really cultivate my curiosity, especially as I get older. I was listening to another cool podcast the other day. It was on Duncan Trussell, and this guy's like an expert on aging, and he was basically saying like the idea of getting old is like the number one problem with getting old is that people think they can't learn new things, can't do new things, physically can't do things. And there's this whole like set of science that shows like there's a cool study. They put a bunch of 80-year-olds in a monastery. Have you heard about this study?
No.
They put a bunch of 80-year-old men in a monastery. They decorated it like 1961. This was like in 1980 something, and told them all like, or so like it might have been the 90s. So they were basically like, you're 20. We want you to act and behave as if you were whatever age you were in 1961. And they kept them there for a week. It's like an astounding study. Like by the end of the week, they're like all out playing touch football. Like it was true. Like they decorated it with the posters of the era. All of them were like, their blood pressure went down. They were happier. They were like physically able to do different things. Then they've repeated the study several times over the years to the same effect.
It's like psychological.
Yeah, totally. Like truly like aging is an idea, right? It's like, it's not actually the reality. And so I've been thinking about that a lot, and I've picked up a lot of new things this year. Number one being writing country music.
No way.
Yeah, and it put me right back in, and I don't think I've ever been more excited about doing something new and challenging than being a songwriter. It's been so fun. I've like met amazing people. Truly been back in beginner's brain. Like I played in bands and stuff in years, and for like when I was in high school and college. And it was so fun to revisit this part of my life that I kind of just was like, hobbyist or whatever, to just be like, no, man, I'm gonna like go in and like hang out with my friend who's a amazing like Grammy Award winning songwriter and learn how to write music. It's been the best. And so I do think that like that's something for me that's just been so silly in the best way.
That's
and
amazing.
Yeah, I know.
That is so
I love that
cool.
so much. I can't remember who said this quote, but it was, I think it was an anthropologist maybe, who's like, the goal is to die young as late as possible. And I was like, I think that's my new life goal. I was like, I just want to feel young and then put it off, die young.
I think everybody kind of has an internal age that they stop at or that they most identify with. I think mine's 26. Like I really have always felt 26. I think when I turned 26, I was like, yep, this is it. Like this is the age I'm meant to be. And I've tried to kind of keep that because even though hopefully I'm not making some of the same mistakes I made at 26, I still feel like I'm capable and open enough to try new things. And I'm really trying to like just maintain that.
I feel like mine's 30. What about
30,
you guys?
yeah, interesting.
30, because 30 was when I felt like I just gave myself permission to be the kid, but also to like take up more space in life.
I love it.
Yeah, I think I'd probably say like 32,
12?
33 is because similarly, like that's the age where I feel like I felt like just comfortable with who I am and where I was and could sort of let go of like this crushing ambition of where I was supposed to be. Mm-hmm. So I was just saying, though, my wife's out of town right now, and when she's gone, it's 17 because I just play video games and eat junk food. So
Pish is like 11.
Literally like 64. I'm going to be a
Pish is like
really good 64-year-old.
Wait, why is that? That's interesting.
I have no fucking. It's probably because I idolized my grandpa, and he was one of like the coolest guys I've ever known. And just so nice and so like down to earth and grounded. And world-wise, like he grew up in like the Great Depression, and like he went to school in like a farmhouse that had like all grades and like 12 students.
Yes.
And so
Little House on the Prairie style.
Yeah.
You are your grandpa. You are your grandpa.
Yeah, exactly. So once I get there, I just feel like, that's going to be a great time for me.
You just got to hang on until then.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what? Jet told me once that I was a 12-year-old boy, a 16-year-old girl, and a 64-year-old director as a person.
Oh,
and I liked that.
That is good.
Pretty good. That's pretty good.
As I drink from my Star Wars mug.
You are George Lucas.
Can we segue just a little bit, Greg? It's already been, I can't believe how fast time is flying, but I do want to talk a little bit about Mega.
Can we start with where Gray came from?
I mean, honestly, all credit goes to Holly in this regard. I will say that I was the catalyst to. She was trying to come up with a podcast, had pitched some podcasts, and they hadn't had really any bites. And I kept saying, like, you got to do something about a megachurch, because she had worked in a megachurch and has like such a deep knowledge of that world. And I just know so many of the funny stories that happened there and from her upbringing. And she was like, no, I don't want to do it. And then, of course, in some meeting, brought it up like back pocket as the final thing. And they, of course, were like, that's it. Let's do it. Then she really spent the time to like world build it and figure out what it was and kind of base it on the reality that she had come from. The Gray character, who's an Australian youth pastor of a youth group called Climax, if people have any interest in knowing context, is a character that I play. And that was also a pitch that she made, because she had me on as the first guest, and I was like, well, maybe I'm the youth pastor. And she goes, well, you have to be Australian. And I was like, I don't really do a very good Australian accent. And she was like, it doesn't matter. But every megachurch has like, it's such a trope of the world, because they import cool Australians to be like youth pastors and stuff. And there had been an Australian guy at the church that she worked at. Yeah, it was totally her thing. And I just dove into it, being like, okay, I'll give it a try. If you listen to those early episodes, I think I sound like I'm from South Africa, and then it like slowly migrates to New Zealand and then kind of up to Australia. It's like a pan-oceanic accent. Then I kind of figured out a version of it that I think is close enough that even Australians will say it's pretty good, and then they'll say, well, that we would never say this. And I'm like, yeah, of course. The mega thing, like all credit goes to Holly in the formation of that. The response to it has been totally different than we ever imagined. We really went into it thinking this is a comedy podcast for comedy nerds. It's on the regular that we'll get letters from people saying this has been such an important cathartic part of my deconstruction, or my leaving the church, or even just being like, my relationship with my parents is really toxic because they believe one thing, I believe another thing, and just being able to like hear people joke about it is so helpful and disarms it. And I mean, that's to me the highest praise that we get. It feels to me like there's something resonant deep in the satire that makes people be like, you know, if we can laugh at something, it really does disarm it and make it less scary. We have our own like issues and backgrounds with family and things. All of us do that. It's like, whether it's politics or religion or the things that you're not supposed to talk about around the Thanksgiving table, right? That's been like the coolest part of it, is that it kind of gave people a safe space to laugh about it and share it with their other friend who was in youth group with them. They got to be like, oh my God, can you believe they just did something about this? Or, you know, so that's been like the delight of it, I think.
I love the phrase, if we can laugh at it, we disarm it.
Yeah, right.
That's so wonderful.
Yeah, and it takes some practice too, because there are times when I'm like, I don't think we can go there. I'm like uncomfortable with it, and then we have to like sit and talk about like, well, what's behind that, and like, what am I afraid of? Or Holly, I think, is sensitive in terms of people's like, I think we have a good lens on who is the target of this. We talk about that all the time, which is like, it's actually not really a podcast satirizing faith that much. It's really, to me, about satirizing the culture of American capitalist Christianity, and also people that don't read the book that they pretend to believe in with every single ounce of themselves. And so, you know, we talk about that a lot, because I don't think we ever wanted to, you know, there are aspects of religion and spirituality, or whatever you want to call it, that are super helpful to people and it helps them in their lives. That was never really the target of the show.
Do you feel like you're at the place now in Mega, because you've been doing it for a while, that you are in Improv, where you're like finding what's fresh about it, or does it still feel new and exciting?
Yeah, that's another one where we went through like a little slump, I feel like, where we were like, God, like, how do we shake this up? And just in like the last 4 or 5 months, it's like hit a new stride again. Like, I just wrote a mini series that like takes place within the world of Mega, that's going to come out as its own sort of like pod within the pod. That's a satirization of this. There was a big podcast last year called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, which was about this like meltdown of this megachurch. You know, it sounds like a true crime podcast, and it's got all the like scoring and stuff. Even that, like I've been working on that, and it's just like, oh, there's a lot here that I don't get to do as my character, but in this regard, I'm playing a food blogger who stumbles on a story about the lead pastor of the podcast, and then to try to get people to come to his food blog tries to sort of chase down the story, but he's not very good at it. And so it was just so fun to like write in a different voice and have people come in and improvise like based on like the story that I was writing. And yeah, so there is stuff now that I feel like, and actually Travis has been so helpful in terms of just like, even just like getting it out there in terms of clips on the internet. That's been super fun to have people discover the podcast that way, because I think when you make stuff, a lot of times you feel like you're just launching it into the void. There's just so much stuff, right? To have anybody listen, to have anybody respond is like, to me, like that's the great relationship that you have as somebody who makes something with somebody who like gets to watch or listen to something. And to have that reciprocation is fantastic. And I think that's like what we continue to like get excited by.
That reminds me of a discussion we had in college. One of my professors asked, true or false, art is for the consumer. And we had this big debate of like, no, the art is for the artist. It's self-fulfilling, and they just want to create something. It's like, well, but if you just create it and send it into the void, is it really art? Like, what's? Yeah. It was just so there is. We don't have time to go down that road, but there is something undeniable about like part of what we do as performers depends on like audience feedback.
100%. We do comedy, man. There's no comedy without a laugh. I have a hard time believing anybody doing comedy is happy if they're making something in the vacuum. Like it just doesn't seem to me to be the purpose.
I think in this book, Playing the Audience, he says that he feels like you can make something and it's artistry, but it becomes art once the relationship to your audience happens. Like that connection's the last part.
Yeah.
That makes it
art.
art.
I like that.
Because there's still a craft. You can make something for yourself, but that's the last connection.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you can make all the furniture you want and sit on it, and it's great. But then like if you make a chair for somebody else, like that's a very different relationship. Mm-hmm. We're in an exciting time in terms of the cost of making things is just continuing to like track to zero. That's bad in terms of getting paid for things. I do think it's in terms of making things, it's great. There's like a weird trade-off there. For us to even do this podcast would be so much harder 2 years ago than it is now. And now look at us, like we're like getting to talk about improv and stuff on a weekend. It looks and sounds great. And like, then you get to plug it into the internet and like people can find it and listen to it anywhere. That's kind of a miracle. And I love it.
Yeah. It's like the capitalism portion of being like making money might be harder or different. But now it's like, oh, I can make a movie. If this was 20 years ago, it would have been harder. If it was 30 years ago, it would have been cost so much money, and maybe it's harder to get paid, but it's really cool that you're like, I can kind of make whatever I want.
Yeah. I was like astounded. We did shows in Poland like 4 years ago, I guess. It was before the pandemic, 5 years ago maybe. And I just remember being so blown away because I was like, so what do you guys do for like your jobs or whatever? And they were like, we do improv. And it was like, no, like, do you do TV or like, how do you like pay the bills? And they're like, we do improv. And it's like, well, how? And it's like, well, the government gives us like an artist grant to like be doing improv. And it's like,
I would kill for government funded theater. Oh my God. And then you don't have to be responsible for the audience. You can like, in the sense that here theater is like, I got to do Sound of Music the 12th time, it's like, I got to get butts in the seat. Instead, you're like, I'm going to do some experimental shit and push the boundaries, and we should all move.
And that's such like a European idea of just like benefit. Like art is like there's cultural capital in art, and we need to fund that is such a different idea than here. Don't get me on my soapbox about this, but like we don't have a Secretary of Arts. Like it's like an $80 billion export or something. Like the United States makes more art and content and movies than anywhere else in the world, yet we don't even like have representation in a presidential cabinet seat for all the people that are making it.
Just let us
like,
starve.
It far outshines like what, it's crazy. Come on, Buttigieg, let's get you in the art seat.
Heck yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like, yeah, it drives me crazy because like you'd go there and it doesn't come without its problems. Like in Poland, like now there's like a far right-wing government, and I know that like there was like censorship going on. They would pull funding because they thought if like things were too critical, and like there's definitely like a medium where it's like, oh yeah, like you don't want the government telling you what you can and can't do. I don't think that was happening at the Improv Theater where they got like a great government grant to like operate and pay their performers. Yeah, it's just not a value here. It's a high value for people to consume. It's just not a high value for people to pay for or to support. And like it's a crime. But you know, the other thing that I love about like what we're talking about, even with the internet, like Patreon and all that stuff, there is something really cool about that I think is only going to get better, which is, can I just be a more direct line? Like if you take out the middleman of all the places that are putting the stuff up or out, can you just connect people who are making cool stuff with the people who want to consume that cool stuff in some kind of beneficial quid pro quo? And I think that is getting easier.
Well, it's like Hollywood was built by the mafia. So the idea of like an agent takes a cut, this person takes a cut, all the admin, you're like, it's like being in the mob. That's what we're thinking is normal and correct.
Yes.
Is insane.
And that a bunch of middlemen get to just like take cuts out of your thing for doing what is always my question. What exactly did you do?
For gatekeeping and like keeping you away from the
and
person
I think
you
that
actually
is
want to talk to.
changing, and I think in a good way for the most part. There's a cool theory called 1,000 true fans, and if you have 1,000 true fans, you can sort of like make a living as an artist. And I think that's like only becoming more true, being able to find the things in the communities and the niches and the things that you're interested in. If you're making something for that community, like they're going to find it.
So I'm glad we're finally talking about crypto.
Crypto, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Blockchain solves it, bro.
Yeah.
Blockchain solves it. We just got to come up with our own art coin. Impro coin.
Okay, so I've got this idea that I'm working on. It's called Pish Bucks.
Pish Bucks.
And it's 5 separate cryptos, and there's
I'm
like
in.
a fire Pish Buck, there's an air Pish Buck, there's a water Pish Buck, there's an earth
I'm in it.
Pish Buck, and
I'm
then there's
telling
a
you, I'll
heart
buy
Pish
it.
Buck. And each one conveys special digital privileges on the owner. Like one person gets access to my phone, and like they can call me 24/7 for advice. And then like another one, like, I don't know. I haven't thought it through too much, but
Yeah, what is the fire Pish Buck?
I'm not sure.
Andrew Bankman
Okay.
Pish Fried. You're basically the guy that's going to take down the arts economy.
Yeah, exactly.
So if any of you listeners are interested in investing in Pishbuck, you actually, how it works is you Venmo me.
Yeah.
Venmo me, and then we'll get you sorted with some Pishbucks.
Just hit the QR code there in the show notes, and yeah, Venmo, send us Bitcoin to get your Pishbucks.
That's right.
Yeah, how has Patreon been for you? Like, what's that experience been like building that portion of it and having to kind of turn on the different side of your brain?
Yeah, it's been amazing, honestly, and it's only talk about like something that is truly like you're learning. It's been great. I mean, it is just its own little community. When that email comes through of like, hey, somebody subscribed to your Patreon, it's like such a great feeling because you feel like, okay, we've made 200 plus episodes of this thing, and someone finally was like, yeah, all right, I'm going to step up and pay $5 a month or whatever for it. It feels great. I think Patreon is only, like, I think those models are only going to get, like, Patreon's kind of, I mean, my problem with it is it's kind of clunky technology. Like, it's not the best technology, but I think the idea behind it is really great. And I mean, sorry, Pish, to tell you, but I think there will be ways in like not the too distant future of just being like, oh yeah, like I can directly pay without the middleman of Patreon my favorite artist, and that probably will be blockchain, my man. Hate to tell you, the Pish Bucks
It's a future, man.
are
It's
a good
a future.
idea.
Actually, of all the people I know, Pish is
It's a
the
future.
most pro blockchain person in my circle.
We don't have to have that on air. Cut that out.
I'm so pro blockchain. Pish and I need to get together and talk crypto because I actually am very
It's
fascinated
wonderful.
by a lot of that stuff.
You two need to get together, talk crypto, talk AI.
Talk crypto, talk
TikTok.
AI, talk about supplements that we're taking to make our muscles huge, like muscle bomb or something.
Muscle balm.
Oh, not that last one. Travis is the strongest person here.
That's staying in.
Well, the AI thing, I'm deep into the weeds because in the past week, I've been so into aliens and AI that I thought I was losing my mind because I went down like the deepest, darkest rabbit holes on the internet. And then I had to kind of pull myself out of that and be like, okay, no aliens right now, but definitely this AI thing is a problem. It's a job killer in so many ways, and I do think, I mean, the WGA is about to strike, and like one of the things about it is like not hiring AI, like not being able to like reappropriate content into an AI to just make spin-off shows that you didn't license or come up with. And I
it's
think
so crazy because it all comes down to the fact that we are not provided for by the larger community.
Yeah.
So we're like, how am I going to provide for myself? And you're like, well, if we were all provided for and we felt like we were going to be taken care of, then who cares? Like, people are making fan fiction. Nobody's mad at them for making fan fiction because they're not making money off of something that you need to provide for yourself.
Yeah.
And the way that we look at money.
Yeah, if we were getting taken care of, then like, sure, let the robots do all the work. That sounds great.
Or just like, I'm going to make my thing because it's fun for me and fun for my audience, and it's not going to take away from that.
Yeah, I think that's half of it. I think the monetary sort of like universal basic income or whatever the like outcome of this will be fascinating. But I think the other part that we haven't reconciled with is the spiritual side. What does it mean to have great expertise in something that then can be instantaneously replicated artificially?
Yeah.
There's a great documentary about the Go AI that Google built to play the game Go. And I would highly recommend everyone watch it. There, you know, the game of Go is sort of a complicated, like it's a huge game in like Korea and other parts of the world, but I'm saying like it's their chess. Maybe it's like a bad analogy, but it took an AI versus the top Go player in the world. And it was amazing to watch this player who no one can beat essentially be like, I'm not worried about it. Like Go is so much about like logic, but it's also about like reading your opponent and all the small little details of someone who's across the board from you. I won't spoil it, but there are moments in this thing where you are shook because you're watching someone have the thing that they are ultimately the best at and took years and years to learn just stripped. And what does that mean if you can just in the future say download, like I want to play Bach. Okay, I just download my Bach thing and I can play Bach. Like, what does that mean? I think it's going to change the entire view of what it is to make art. And a lot of AI proponents would say like, oh, it's just going to be this like tool that we can use to make cooler art. I am a little bit suspect of, we've had 100,000 years of human development to then like in essentially 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, jump into a computer. I think it's going to be wild.
It's like mental breakdown central. But the thing is, well, this leads me to the question of what gives you worth and what gives you meaning.
Yes.
Does it give you worth and meaning to contribute in that way? Or is it like you're finding your own meaning anyway?
Yep.
And so you find meaning from the joy of getting better at something, or like where does, and how we put worth on ourselves being good at something.
Uh-huh.
And you're just going to have to question it all.
Yeah,
the meaning
I
of
think
life.
it's going to be, we're going to feel it's going to feel schizophrenic, I think. There's a great Terrence McKenna, I love that weird psychonaut shit, but he talks about how like, it's going to get weird, folks. It's going to get very weird. And you can already feel it. We're at the beginning of it. A third of the planet doesn't even have the internet. Like, what are we talking about? We're like so in the very beginning of who knows what information age is. So I think it's going to feel very strange to be a human.
Fish, you need to stop yelling at your Google. Voice. You need to stop
I thank
yelling
my
at it.
Chat GPT. I've used Chat GPT to write like parking ticket letters and things like that. And I'll be like, thanks so much. That was a great job.
That my wife thanks Alexa for everything. She'll be like, turn on the lights, and then she will, and she'll be like, thank you.
I've read enough science fiction in my life that you should just try to be polite to them because, you know, the outcome is they lock the airlock and you can't get out of the spaceship.
Right.
So
Has anybody played Detroit Become Human?
no. Is this a video game?
It's like it's a video game about androids, but it really is amazing storytelling and really poses the question by making you play an android about being like, when do you start to care about it the same way that you care about the human? Is there a point for you where you're like, now it's human?
Yeah.
And does it make you care less about somebody that you thought was human when you find out that they're an android? Like, do you suddenly not care? Are you like, oh, I still love them? It's really good.
I think it's interesting because so much about technology is changing for us as artists, like improvising. We were improvising on Zoom for a while. That really, the technology isn't quite there yet. It doesn't feel like, but
Right.
like when like the conversation about like what does it mean to be a human, what is a human, when we're now so used to having digital avatars in a video game that are completely different from us, and being able to watch a YouTuber now have like a motion capture suit on and be a completely different character on the fly, just doing a freaking Twitch stream.
Yeah.
It's
There are people that have never improvised in IRL, as they say. There's a generation of improvisers who only know Zoom improv.
Yeah, we just had Sean Landry on, and she talked about that, about how she did a whole range of classes, and people they didn't want to perform on stage.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's really fascinating. And to me, I guess I go back to that thing of, I mean, I never did a Zoom improv show. Again, like I was saying, the green room to the stage is to me is like as important. And it's, if I can't feel that, I just didn't want to put it into 2D on a screen. I just couldn't wrap my head around it.
It was very frustrating. We had fun and we learned a lot, but it was very frustrating to the muscle memory.
After like the 30th time, no exaggeration, I remember having one where I was like, okay, I touched it a little. I touched the joy. It took me fucking forever. And then I was like, oh. And it was like a weird thing where I almost feel like I had to, I don't know how you two feel. I almost feel like I had to brainwash myself to be so much more attentive to the two of you and not where I was. It was really
It's called
hard.
metaprogramming.
Yeah, it was so hard.
You metaprogrammed.
I did.
Well, I guess we just have to have another pandemic. I'll give it a try.
Damn it.
Let's try to tie this all together. We're talking about
Let's put
Travis,
a bullet in this
yeah,
one.
Travis,
Travis is
what was the
saying.
point? What is the meaning of life?
I have something. I have
Pish
something.
left.
Pish is
Travis is
gone.
Pish left.
Pish is like,
Travis is
Travis
we got to
is
bury
talking.
this thing.
Yeah.
This will never come
We're
out.
talking about AI and like stuff getting weird and like what it means to be a human being. And I think there's something, in the cult of improv and the philosophies of being a good improviser that translate into being a good human being as well, that I think might be like really important and valuable for people, comedians or performers or not, just to like learn about being a good improviser. And I just want to know if you have any thoughts on that.
I think improv makes people worse. Travis, I'm going to disagree.
Okay, and I guess that's a wrap.
That's it. All right. Yeah, I think that's a really nice sentiment. At the end of the day, for me, it was always being able to learn different ways of. To me, the big life lesson was always like, oh, the thing that you're afraid of is almost always not as scary as you thought it would be. In terms of improv, to put yourself in the position of failure, of fear-based, all the things in our DNA, like I'm going to look bad in front of people, like all our social skills, all our training, our evolution, our fear brain, to try to get into a place of flow state, of letting things happen, picking up your feet and drifting downstream. Like, I think that's the goal of life to me, because especially as like people die, people like all the hard things of being human happen. Like it's all your reaction to them, right? Like they're going to happen. It. How you respond to them is essentially how you're going to navigate them, either well or with difficulty. And so to me, there are like those little fun Zen things about improv that are, don't hold on to it too hard. Like let it be what it is. Put yourself out there. You probably are going to be fine. You ate shit. It actually wasn't that big of a deal. Like all those fun things are great reminders about doing improv. And when I'm like hopefully doing my best work on stage, there are like shards of that like appear in my life that help when there are like the true tragedies, difficulties, frustrations of like just trying to muddle through somehow.
It's like everything we said about Cook County. You're committed to the moment, and then you're also willing to be like, and it also doesn't matter. It's okay. I can let it go.
Yeah.
But it's not neither. It's both.
It's both. Yeah. Trying to hold both those things it's a fun and challenging balance.
Have you ever read The Alchemist?
I have.
That
many years ago, but I need to probably reread it.
I try to read it once a year, but there's a quote, my favorite quote from it. It reminds me of what you just said. The main character is like afraid like take the next step of his journey or whatever. And the wise leader person. I think that's what he's called.
Yeah, leader person. I think his name's Joe. But...
Joe, that's right. Yeah. He just says, tell your heart that the fear of suffering is worse than the suffering itself. Once you actually go through the thing, it's not usually that bad. It's the anxiety and the fear leading up to the thing that's what's really painful.
Totally. Even in the last few years of having some anxious days with friends and loved ones, I can honestly say, like, the person who's going through it is always doing better than everybody around them that's like freaking out about it. And it's such a good reminder to be like, yeah, it's our perception of the thing that's always like putting us in our worst place. The idea that I might fail, like when I'm actually failing or like eating shit or like being laughed with or at or whatever, it's like,
I'm okay. I'm okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, you know,
I think
so
there's like inherently pain in life, but it is not necessarily a teacher unless you're trying to move through it with some grace and vulnerability and with intention, because you can just be in pain and never learn a lesson ever. I think there's like a lot of people that you see it and then you see the opposite, which is, I don't know, trying to move through it with some grace, I think.
Yeah, I am 100% into that.
Well, Greg, from the leader, what did you call the leader man? The leader?
Leader person.
Oh,
wise
from
leader man.
the wise leader person of Stormchaser, me. I just want to thank you. And also, we love you so much. And I truly am often like, you're one of my favorite improvisers. So it was very nice to be able to talk shop with you.
That's very kind. I love y'all and love that you are in pursuit of trying to figure this whole thing out.
Thanks, man.
We got it.
Nailed it. It was way better than Brendan's.
Yeah, Brendan's
so much better.
an idiot.
Maybe we should take Brendan's down.
Yeah, take it down.
That's what I was gonna say. I think we're gonna.
Did he say a bunch of racist stuff?
So I had to edit so much racist stuff out.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Stormchaser Improv Podcast Show.
You can find us on all of the socials. That's right, the social media programs. We're on Instagram and TikTok at Stormchaser Improv. We've also got videos on YouTube. Just search for us at Stormchaser Improv. We've got shows. We've also got clips from our podcast. And you can find all the other links that we have to get tickets to our shows and find other projects that we're working on at the link in our bio on Instagram.
And of course, my friends, if you enjoyed this podcast, push all the buttons, share it, like it, subscribe to it. And if you're listening on iTunes, give us a little 5-star review. That would be fantastic.
This is my friend, Travis Lincoln Cox.
This is my friend, Andrew Pish.
And this is my friend, Anatasha Blakely. Thank you so much for listening. See y'all again soon.
Thank you for listening to the Stormchaser Improv Podcast Show.